I'm Annelies Vos. I'm a Senior Policy Officer for Economic Programs at the International Rescue Committee, and I will be your Master of Ceremony for today and tomorrow, leading you through all the different sessions we have. So today is the first of 2 days where we are going to explore the financial integration of refugees, drawing on research that was conducted in Jordan, Kenya, Mexico, and Uganda, a research partnership between the Katholische Universität Eichstätt-Ingolstadt, Tufts University, and the International Rescue Committee. And that was supported by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and Open Society Foundations. Please note that all our sessions are going to be recorded today. We do hope to make this an interactive event. And so we invite you to engage with our research findings and with other participants, including through the chat. There's also going to be a dedicated Q&A session for you to answer your questions, which is going to be towards the end of the day after our panel discussion. If you would like to speak during the Q&A session, please put your questions in the chat ahead of the session and indicate if you would like to be called upon to ask your question. So then at that point, we will unmute you and ask you to turn your video on. Otherwise, we would unfortunately ask you to keep your audio muted and your video turned off if you're not speaking. We really would love to see everyone's faces, but we have to preserve the internet bandwidth of all our participants around the globe. So therefore, we can unfortunately not have everyone's video on. What we do ask you is if you can change your name and your organization. Like, I mean, you put in your display your full name and your organization so that we can see who you are and we can refer to you properly if we ask you to speak. As a reminder, also before I go into the agenda for today, we will have some breaks built in throughout the symposium program. So to make sure that's not too exhausting to look at the screen all the time. So feel free to take that time to stand up, to stretch, grab some coffee, and return refreshed. So for the agenda for today, you can also find it online on our symposium webpage. We have a detailed agenda with all the speakers, etc. listed. But so for today, we will start with a comprehensive overview of the research findings about how refugee and migrant households manage their livelihoods and finances, and whether and how they integrate into local economies. So the overview of the findings will take about 30 to 40 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll go straight into a policy discussion. So we'll have a discussion around the policy implications of the findings, which will have sort of a key focus on Kenya and Jordan. And then afterwards, we will have a short break. Then after the break, we'll be back with a full panel discussion and then the Q&A session afterwards. So before we dive into the findings now, I would like to introduce Dr. Maria Flashbart, the Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and a member of the German Parliament. She will give a keynote speech to a pre-recorded video. So please, can we have the video now?
Mrs. Geen, Mr. Donofrio, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to open today's Finance and Displacement Symposium. Financial inclusion is key to sustainable development. It is particularly important for vulnerable groups such as forcibly displaced persons. They urgently need access to appropriate, affordable, and timely financial products and services to be able to rebuild their lives and improve their livelihoods. That is why Germany used its G20 presidency in 2017 to put the topic on financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons on the G20 agenda for the first time. Since then, the issue has become even more pressing. There were some 80 million displaced people at the end of 2019. That is 8.7 million more than the previous year. Ongoing crises and conflicts prevent many refugees from returning to their homes. Millions of children, women, and men worldwide live in protracted displacement situations. These developments show that all relevant actors need to further step up their efforts, be it governments, humanitarian and development actors, the private sector, regulators, or academia. I'm proud Germany is a part of a multi-stakeholder roadmap on responsible and sustainable financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons. The roadmap was published at the first Global Refugee Forum in 2019. It is a powerful tool to bring together stakeholders from different sectors and to develop a common understanding of how to secure access to financial services for forcibly displaced persons. Most importantly, it will help us to design useful financial services for displaced persons. The Finance in Displacement research project is a key pillar of Germany's efforts to support the implementation of the roadmap. Sound research is essential to develop evidence-based interventions that benefit forcibly displaced persons and host communities alike. I would like to thank the organizers of today's symposium and the research team from the Catholic University Eichstätt-Ingolstadt, Tufts University, and the International Rescue Committee for their great work. I'm excited to learn more about the results of this research and wish all of you an insightful and inspiring event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are also all very excited. And now we will have also a pre-recorded video. Unfortunately, there was a last-minute meeting coming up for the president of the Catholic University Eichstätt-Ingolstadt, Gabriele Kien, who will give also an introductory keynote speech. Can we have that video as well? Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you as the president of the Catholic University Eichstätt-Ingolstadt to your symposium, Finance in Displacement. I would have loved to greet you here in present. It's a beautiful spring day outside, but I think we can be happy that we at least have the challenge to meet in a digital format. The project we are talking about connects politics, humanitarian agencies and university, and I'm proud that so many highly ranked important people are taking part in this symposium. Your participation underlines the meaning of the project for the society as a whole and the KU. I would like to thank the organizers and the research team of the Catholic University, the Tufts University, and the International Rescue Committee. Particularly, I want to thank the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development for the generous funding that made this project possible. Support for developing countries has always played a major role in the KU. The Refugee Support Initiative launched by our students quickly turned into a great project at the KU and ultimately grew dynamically, so that in the meantime we have even been able to set up our own Center for Flight and Migration, which does a lot of research and transfer into society. Such bottom-up projects and the student initiatives are characteristic of the KU. That is why the FIND project fits in perfectly with our profile and our third mission. The importance of the internationalization at the KU is clearly reflected in this project, in which so many researchers around the world have participated. The research project Finance and Displacement enriches science from several perspectives. On the one hand, the added value of transfer is clearly emphasized. On the other hand, the project impresses with an evidence-based research in which the empirical data collection was carried out on the site in cooperation with local researchers, which is, I think, very important to have that perspective included in the project. I'm now looking forward to the presentation of the research results and thank all those who are involved and make the project and the day possible. And a special thank you to the sponsors again. With the best wishes for the project, I now will hand over the floor to the research team for the project and wish you an exciting conference. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you so much, President Dean, for this welcome and also for the university's efforts on refugee research, which is very important. So now I will hand over to Professor Hans-Martin Zademak. He's the Professor of Economic Geography at the Catholic University. And we will also hear from the lead researchers of the FIND project in Jordan, Kenya, and Mexico. So this next session is going to start with a very short introductory video of the FIND project, and then Professor Hans-Martin will take over. So please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the globe. I'm really very happy to be allowed to speak these words here on behalf of the whole team. Actually, we want to start the introduction of our project, in essence, the objectives and the general research approach with a, again, pre-recorded video. And I'm sorry, it's the third time again, I feel, yeah, you hear a quite strong German accent. Sorry for this, it might be better during the rest of the conference. So Maria, may I ask you for the
research project?
Thank you.
The research project, Finance in Displacement, Exploring and Strengthening Financial Lives of Refugees, or briefly, the FIND project, is a partnership between Catholic University Eichstätt-Ingolstadt, Tufts University, and International Rescue Committee, supported by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development and the Open Society Foundations. We have conducted original empirical research, most notably in Jordan, Kenya, Uganda, and Mexico, next to further field sites where we collaborated with various partners. We seek to understand how refugees and migrants manage their financial and economic lives in the context of protracted displacement. Which financial services do they use? How do they navigate their financial decisions? How do they recover from financial setbacks? We take a deep look at several host country contexts, which offer diversity in encampment and refugee policies, labor market opportunities, and social and civic integration policies. Our overarching research approach is based on grounded theory. We believe this approach is a key tool for discerning the lived experiences of refugees themselves. Given the sensitive nature of the research questions, our approach was to conduct multiple interviews with the same set of respondents over a period of almost 1.5 years. 3 rounds of interviews were conducted by a team of local researchers between August 2019 and December 2020. While many insights are context-specific, the multi-country approach allows us to draw conclusions and make recommendations for practitioners and policymakers working at a global level.
Yeah, the short video you just saw was intended to recall the key objectives and the general research approach of our project. Before we turn to the output of our efforts, the findings of our research, please allow 2 brief personal comments on what we saw. First concerns our methods and way of, as we think, in fact, unique data. We are really grateful that we have been able to conduct a total of more than 580 interviews with men and women from 16 different countries of origin in our different research sites. And many of these interviews lasted for 2 hours or more, digging deeply into the lives of forcibly displaced persons. Very telling interviews, addressing often very personal, very intimate information, and shameful situations, helplessness. Many thanks to all who have contributed and devoted their time to our project. The second comment relates to our conceptual approach and scope. It was indicated in the movie that our research was inspired by a design that aims to generate higher level concepts inductively from emerging patterns in the data. And we feel that by dint of this design, we have been able to successfully advance our knowledge in the framework, a financial health framework, that in fact is capable to improve our understanding of forced displacement in general and finance in displacement in particular. Taking this thought further is in essence the core idea of this symposium. We are convinced that our multi-country approach allows to formulate conclusions which are of relevance and applicable in different contexts, and we aim to inform policy and other initiatives on different scales. Of course, you are welcome to challenge this idea. That's why we get in contact and dialogue with you. We will now turn to our research output and findings. Again, first, we're going to present a condensed overview in a pre-record video. Then we have 25 minutes of our lead researchers presenting a lot of original insights. And my final remark would be, you might remember that at the very end of the short video, you saw this bridge, and I really would like to invite you to keep this image of the bridge in your mind throughout the whole symposium. That's actually what the FIND project is about. We are building bridges between the humanitarian sector, academia, political world, and most notably forcibly displaced persons themselves. So if our symposium might bring us a step forward in strengthening this bridge, that would be a great issue. Thank you very much. And I pass over now to the introduction of what we call our high-level findings now. Maria, may I ask you to start the second movie? Thank you.
Managing their finances is a significant challenge for migrants and refugees. The FIND project set out to learn about how refugees integrate financially into their new surroundings. This information would lead us, we hope, to better policies, programs, and products. In this video, we want to share two main aspects on the strategies refugees use to manage their money. Firstly, we want to introduce our adaptation of the financial health framework, a conceptual approach that is a useful way to understand the financial lives of displaced persons. And secondly, we will present our key findings in form of 5 concise messages. As a first important outcome of our research efforts on a conceptual level, we have adopted the Council for Financial Inclusion's financial health framework for use in the context of displacement. We see the framework as a tool for analyzing the factors that contribute to a refugee's economic well-being. Refugees or migrants are financially healthy when they can positively answer these 5 questions. Can they meet their basic needs? On a daily basis, do they have enough to eat, a safe place to stay, or have the right kinds of medicines to survive? Can they comfortably manage their debt? Some debt is manageable, but too much can make individuals and households vulnerable to violence and extortion. Can they recover from financial setbacks? Setbacks could be the loss of a job or the costs associated with a medical emergency. Being able to borrow from social networks, accessing humanitarian aid, or dipping into savings are some ways they can recover from a setback. Can they invest in assets and opportunities? Many refugees arrive stripped of their assets and savings. Being able to raise a lump sum by borrowing or saving enables them to invest in opportunities that can increase safety, income, or long-term prospects. Can they continually expand their planning horizons? Over time, newly arrived refugees should be able to move from daily hand-to-mouth struggles to contemplate a financial future that may be weeks, months, and even years away. We will return to this 5-point framework in a moment. For now, we would like to introduce you to our 5 key findings from the study. Finding number 1 argues for the necessity of foundational rights and opportunities. Without the ability to earn an income, refugees have limited uses for financial services. Our second finding highlights that as livelihoods develop over time, the need for financial services grows right alongside that development. If refugees are allowed to participate in healthy economies, Then their livelihoods progress quite naturally. Early financial portfolios may only include basic instruments, but over time, as refugees grow and diversify their livelihoods, they look for more sophisticated financial services. Our third finding touches on whether we should design special financial products for migrants and refugees or adopt mainstream services. Different organizations have been nudging refugees into financial services that are not yet mature and often experimental. At the same time, regulators have blocked refugees from accessing mainstream services that could support refugees. We conclude that refugees want mainstream services that are popular for the host population. Our fourth finding addresses the great uncertainties refugees and migrants face and its effect on their ability to plan for and invest in their future. When they cannot plan on better livelihoods, they refrain from making important investments. Instead, they only invest enough to get by, in hopes that they may be resettled elsewhere. This leaves them in a coping phase we call the survivalihood phase. Our fifth finding, finally, refers to the Refugee Financial Health Framework we introduced already in the first part of this video. We argue that the adapted version of this framework is useful for analyzing the financial well-being of displaced persons. In this sense, our empirical evidence indicates that financial services are only one contributing factor to financial well-being, and not the most important one. Quality, friendships, and social networks play a major role, as does documentation that allows for work opportunities and the ability to move about. We found these findings to be relevant beyond our 4 research sites. We invite you to contest these messages throughout the symposium, always keeping in mind that they shall inform future policymaking and programming in order to improve the lives of displaced persons.
Yeah, thank you, Maria and Eva, especially for this first insight in a nutshell, what of our findings. And I'm happy to hand over now to our lead researchers in Kenya, in Jordan, and in Mexico. We have first Julie Zolman and Swati Dhawan, which are gonna dive deep into the research contexts and in our findings in Jordan, Kenya, and then Maria in Mexico. Thank you, the floor is yours.
Please, can Julie and Swati be unmuted? Okay.
We can't hear Swati.
We can't hear you, Swati.
We still can't hear you.
Let's try this.
Yeah, now we can.
Yeah, so I'm joining from my phone now. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Like I said, so before we dive into the findings, we would like to spend some time to highlight some key points about the refugee situation in the 2 countries, which will help us contextualize the findings. First, on Jordan. So Jordan has a long history of hosting refugees, with close to 750 refugees registered. It is the 3rd largest host in absolute numbers worldwide. In fact, 10% of the country's population are refugees. More than 80% of them live not in camps, but in urban areas. About 75% registered Syrian refugees arrived in Jordan in 2012 and 2013. So they have been already in the country for about 9 years. Their poverty rates still remain quite high. Before the pandemic, 79% of refugees lived below poverty line, and this has increased to close to 90% due to COVID. Apart from Syrians, there are refugees from 56 other countries registered with UNHCR in Jordan. The top countries include Iraq, Yemen, Sudan, and Somalia, nationalities that we also included in our sample. Jordan is also host to a high number of migrant workers, mainly from Egypt and Southeast Asia. These different populations coexist alongside low-income Jordanians. Syrians are more readily accepted, but trust is declining as competition over work and resources is rising. With a 25% unemployment rate and rising cost of living, this is bound to happen. Other refugees from Yemen, Sudan, Somalia are less socially integrated and often face racial discrimination. Our Iraqi participants, who are mainly from religious minorities, have created their own enclaves fearing persecution. Refugees from these nationalities, who we will call non-Syrian refugees for ease, have fewer legal rights and are offered fewer services in the humanitarian system. Jordan has also been an epicenter for experiments on humanitarian programming. Digital cash assistance using biometric IDs is common. The famous Jordan Response Plan and Jordan Compact have brought together the government, humanitarian, and development actors to support Syrian refugees. The National Financial Inclusion Strategy also recognizes refugees as an important segment. And the central bank has allowed refugees to open mobile wallets, though this is still a new system in the country and very few Jordanians are using it.
Hi, I'm Julie Zolman, the lead researcher for Kenya. Kenya is home to more than 500,000 refugees, and an estimated 86% of them are forcibly confined to refugee camps in some of the harshest environments in the country. The average Somali or South Sudanese refugee in Kenya has already been displaced here for 26 years. A good number of refugees were even born in Kenya and have yet to see their country of nationality. In addition to South Sudanese and Somalis, the country hosts Ethiopians, Congolese, Rwandese, Ugandans, and others. The government's policies towards refugees have become increasingly securitized. Today, not only is it a criminal offense to leave the camps without permission, but very few refugees successfully receive work permits, and they're barred from accessing mainstream M-Pesa mobile money services using their own IDs. Additional barriers face those who would like to open bank accounts, and that's especially true outside of the refugee camps. Urban refugees' livelihoods are frequently interrupted by police harassment, and they also face high costs of living, especially in rent, to live in safe neighborhoods in the city. Some refugees in camps do manage to build stronger and more sustainable livelihoods than those in cities, but nearly all of that is done informally, as the UN's so-called wage harmonization caps professional earnings at levels that hover just around the consumption poverty line for a single adult. Most refugees in Kenya face perpetual confinement and uncertainty. At the end of March, the Kenyan government gave the UNHCR a 2-week ultimatum to craft a plan to immediately repatriate all of the country's refugees and close the camps. While a local court postponed this deadline, this was yet one more example of the Kenyan government's actions failing to live up to the country's international commitments.
With support from very capable team of local researchers, some of whom were from refugee communities themselves, we conducted 3 rounds of qualitative in-depth interviews over a period of 1 year. In Jordan, we started in late 2019 and finished in December 2020. Our sample of 89 participants is equally split between Syrians and non-Syrians. And here, just to mention again, this doesn't include Palestinians, but those from Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, and Sudan. And they were spread across Amman, northern governorates of Irbid and Mafraq, and in the industrial towns of Sahab and Zarqa, and also in remote south in Karak. The second and third round of interviews were conducted during COVID, with most of them happening over the phone.
Our research team here in Kenya got a little bit of a later start due to required ethics reviews, research permits, and then adaptations to deal with research restrictions around COVID. The team conducted 3 rounds of interviews, all by phone, between June and November 2020. And because we had only done our sampling in Nairobi, we were confined to Nairobi for the course of the project. So in an effort to sort of expand our view outside of Nairobi, we collected an additional 30 financial autobiographies from refugees living outside of Nairobi, mostly in Kakuma, to complement our interview data. And we're in the process of compiling those biographies into a local publication slated to release around July or August of this year. While COVID forced us to make a lot of adaptations to our initial methodological plans, one feature that really stayed constant was this idea of repeat interactions with the same pool of respondents. We found that building these relationships over time was going to be really important for building trust and deepening our understanding of people's lives and experiences. That seemed to prove particularly important during COVID as livelihoods and coping strategies changed very quickly. We'll now turn back to the high-level findings and share some of the experience and evidence from Kenya and Jordan that helped lead us to those conclusions. This is meant to be sorting issue.
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, so now back to the high-level findings. So our first finding relates to foundational rights, such as the right to work, set up businesses, to move freely, and to access foundational IDs. This may sound a bit obvious. We all know that refugees across the world struggle with accessing these basic rights. Why do we then put it as our number one finding, and that too in the context of financial inclusion? We will spend a few minutes on this slide to explain this connection and also share two stories from Jordan that would help you to understand this better. We saw in both Jordan and Kenya, and even in other fine countries, that without these foundational rights, financial services offer refugees very few benefits. Without the freedom to pursue livelihoods, financial services matter only to channel direct transfers of aid and remittances to refugees dependent on others. Their utility ends there. And there is little reason to use services beyond those very specific transfer functions. Now, without full inclusion at the foundational level, we saw that in Jordan, most of our Syrian participants who had been in the country for 8 to 9 years were still stuck in survival mode. Let's consider the case of Iman and her family. Iman is a middle-aged Syrian woman. She lives in a small town in the north with her husband and 3 sons, one of whom is married and recently had a baby, and another one who is differently abled. Iman is outspoken. She feels socially integrated and has made good friendships with Syrians and Jordanians over the last 8 years. But she is not very happy with her financial situation. Why is that? Because they need to borrow every month to meet basic needs. When we met her last, she had outstanding debts of 900 JDs. That's about $1,270 to 11 different lenders. Her eldest son and husband work without legal work permits. The work is intermittent and low paying, earning about $5 to $7 a day. It is physically demanding and requires long hours, even up to 14 hours a day. Her youngest son, who is 19, could not manage to cope and quit. His mental health is deteriorating, like many other men who feel unable to contribute to their families. More than half of their monthly income goes into paying for rent. Iman hopes that they could buy a house in Jordan so that they do not have to pay rent every month. They have land in Syria and they could sell that, but Syrian refugees like her are not allowed to buy property in Jordan. She wishes that she could save money and open a car repair shop for her son, but that is also not easy. Even if she could get the money, it is not easy to find a Jordanian partner who she could trust. We saw others who tried to start a business with a Jordanian partner as required by law and lose everything to those partners after they had invested their life savings, time, and energy into building something more sustainable. Lastly, she's also wary of making such investment as long as their legal status in Jordan is not secure. She fears that they could be forced to leave and lose everything. Now, better finance might help Iman take advantage of an opportunity. The bigger problem, however, is that such opportunities are far too scarce and far too risky. Things are even more challenging for non-Syrian refugees. Yakim, a 24-year-old Yemeni young man, is another case I would like to highlight. He arrived in Jordan in 2016, accompanying his stepmother who had cancer. They came on a medical visa. They thought they would return soon, but the situation in Yemen got worse. Yakim's father was killed in the war and his brothers escaped to South Yemen. They registered with UNHCR in Jordan after Yakim was arrested by the police for working at a bakery without a legal permit. In such cases, illegal workers are made to sign a pledge that they will not repeat this again. But not working isn't an option. Very few Yemenis and other refugees from non-Syrian nationalities receive monthly humanitarian cash assistance. Applying for a work permit is next to impossible. They fear deportation if they go to Interior Ministry for security check and approvals. And this fear is not unfounded. Recently, the government of Jordan deported some Yemeni asylum seekers and issued deportation orders against others who applied for work permits. The other issue is the high cost of these work permits. Another Yemeni participant who got an approval for the permit was asked to pay 1,100 JDs in overstay fines, 1,500 JDs as permit fees for last 2 years, and 750 JDs for the current year. That's close to $4,700 US. There is no way that any of our participants could pay that sort of money. In spite of rhetoric about self-reliance, the reality is that most refugees are forced into illegal precarious work, often earning only about a quarter of their Jordanian counterparts, while doing backbreaking labor and constantly running away from the police. Similarly, in Kenya, refugees struggle to access work permits. In cities, men face harassment from law enforcement. And all refugees are denied the right to work freely, to move freely throughout the country, limiting their abilities to freely pursue and invest in opportunities. Finance can do little to support their resilience when they face these kinds of systemic foundational barriers. So the starting point is to address these barriers that obstruct refugees' livelihoods and incomes. Only then refugees can afford to use savings, credit, insurance, and other financial services. This brings us now to the second high-level finding, which is that needs and uses for financial services co-evolve only when livelihoods strengthen and diversify. Let's look at what we learned about refugee livelihoods, about how refugee livelihoods are progressing. In economies where refugees are welcomed and integrated, we see that livelihoods can gradually improve over time, as you would see in this slide. Refugees can even graduate into what we call a livelihood ratcheting phase, the third phase on the slide, where they receive income from multiple and improving sources. However, in both Kenya and Jordan, we see that refugees actually experience what you see here on the slide now. These financial journeys are drawn by the respondents in Jordan. And this was before the pandemic, after which things have surely worsened. But even before that, we did not see ratcheting up process happening. Even when in few exceptional cases, livelihoods were progressing, it was not linear. It was something similar to what you see in graph number 4 here. Refugees suffered frequent setbacks and had to restart again and again. The foundational issues we have discussed already presented the biggest barriers here. So what we see is that many are stuck at the dependent stage, even after many years of arrival. They are not able to secure income from work and rely on handouts and aid. Getting stuck here has been particularly common for women-headed households, especially those headed by mothers of young children, and for families where men are not able to work due to fear of detention. A large majority are stuck in the second phase, what we call the survivalhoods phase, where income from work is lumpy, seasonal, and uncertain. Business ventures remain small and survival-oriented. Savings are nil or very small. As businesses backslided and jobs were lost, our participants went back and forth between these two phases of dependence and survivalhoods. The biggest financial needs here are for receipts of transfers as smoothing cash flows, which is done mainly through informal borrowing from friends and shop credit. Now, because livelihoods fail to develop, financial services are not particularly useful, and the demand for them flatlines. In fact, what we see is that resources outside the financial services sector do most of the heavy lifting of finance. And these include social networks, aid agencies, community-driven and faith-based organizations. So the key message here is that financial inclusion stakeholders cannot really force the market, as the demand for financial services would only co-evolve as livelihoods progress. Over to Julie now for the next 3 findings.
Thanks, Swati. Our third finding is that mainstream financial services found popular by the host population should really be the priority that we're pushing for in terms of refugee access. One thing that's striking about financial inclusion for refugees, particularly in Kenya, is that we have given up on the inclusion part. Kenya has a vibrant mobile money ecosystem that pretty efficiently covers most of the financial bases that refugees need, given their current livelihood status. M-Pesa allows for receipt of international and domestic remittances, incoming and outgoing payments, a safe store of account, and even nano credit for cash flow smoothing. But in the past several years, refugees have been barred from opening their own M-Pesa accounts. In our sample in Nairobi, about half of our participants had been grandfathered into the system, using acceptable documents when they were allowed. Among the others, they either went without or they borrowed a Kenyan friend's ID to access the system, which is part of the country's basic infrastructure of commerce. So in other words, M-Pesa could help refugees solve many of their financial problems, but its utility today is limited by intentional exclusions. The World Food Programme recognized that M-Pesa would be a highly efficient way to distribute food aid vouchers, or even cash assistance. But they were forced to roll out a very restricted version of the software, limiting how much of the system refugees could use. It's basically a form of financial encampment, not inclusion. Without legal access to M-Pesa, refugees are forced to access it through illegal means, and that can be precarious. One of our Nairobi respondents opened his account with a Kenyan friend's ID. And our respondent has since used the system extensively to collect money from customers and received the occasional international remittance from fellow refugees who have since been resettled. But during COVID, his friend who had lent him the ID started getting nervous about having this other M-Pesa line out there attached to his name. He asked our respondent to give back the SIM card. This was giving our respondent quite a bit of stress. It's not easy to convince someone else to share their ID, and our respondent uses this account for so many things. It's also connected to the phone number that all of his contacts know. In Jordan, instead of allowing refugees access to banking services, they've been encouraged to use a whole new mobile money system, which is not widely used by Jordanians. The real value of mobile money would come from the network effects and efficiencies, which have yet to materialize. Yet again, the use cases remain limited, mainly to receive cash assistance. It does not address the key concerns of refugees, that are things around earning an income, reducing their dependence on debt, and building a cushion against financial shocks. So in considering refugees' financial inclusion and displacement, practitioners and policymakers need to push more forcefully to genuinely include refugees in existing systems and networks, rather than opting for or allowing workarounds that create new services that end up being enclaves of exclusion and muting the impact that such services can have both on refugees and local economies. We found that the uncertainty of long-term prospects discourages refugee investment in both skills and assets. It limits their self-reliance and produces a permanent dependence on charity. Our research participants were unsure if they would ever be able to return home. At the same time, they were told they cannot permanently stay in their current host countries. Many hope for resettlement in a third country, but that process reaches only a small share of refugees and can take many years to materialize. In some places like Jordan, the host country government can even bar them from marrying host country nationals, sort of throwing off their entire long-term plans. In such situations, there is no rationale to invest. You expect you're not allowed to stay. You'll need to liquidate anything you've accumulated, and you can't even be sure what kinds of skills you really need to arm yourself with in the next phase of your life. It also causes a huge amount of stress. As one of our Kenyan respondents explained, quote, "Waiting for resettlement has affected me significantly on all sides. I can't sleep, I overthink, I can't make decisions. I have no choice but to wait with all of these uncertainties." As we were doing this FIND research, both in Kenya and Jordan and elsewhere, we started asking ourselves, what if instead of putting the question first, what can financial services do to support refugees, we instead centered the outcomes that we care about? And that led us to this financial health framework. If we set our sights on building refugee financial health, Could we then look at what kinds of inputs and pathways get us there? When we do that, we see that many inputs are needed to build financial health. And in many cases, financial services are not the most important one. Most important are those foundational rights, particularly the right to work, the right to move, and also to some extent to have a predictable path for a long-term solution. Our research pointed out the importance of other key drivers such as language, mental health, social networks, and pre-existing assets. All of those varied widely by nationality and by gender. Using this broader field of vision, practitioners can imagine interventions that build the foundations for financial health, looking beyond just financial services, where we know the payoffs are likely to be limited without the other building blocks put in place. These additional inputs were really themselves closely tied to financial integration. Given the dominance of informal finance in terms of scale and importance for these populations, inclusion demands that they be connected to networks that matter. Networks mattered for encouraging women to get out of the house and have a public life. Networks helped refugees find jobs, even short-term ones, and to figure out fallback options when a business fell apart. Networks provided childcare, helping women to do some kind of business or work on their language skills. Refugees who built relationships with landlords and shopkeepers, particularly during COVID, realized they could access a line of credit during a crisis. Some women, for example, were able to borrow inputs from shopkeepers to start a business making tea or baked goods in their neighborhoods. We saw in both Jordan and Kenya that there were factors that helped build and strengthen these kinds of ties. Things like shared language or language training classes, capacity building opportunities in small groups, even when the skills themselves were not very useful. Jobs, volunteering, apprenticeships, and internships all gave people chances to connect with new people, as did living in mixed neighborhoods, joining faith-based communities, and connecting through social media. Refugees remained isolated, however, if they had to move frequently, faced high transport costs to participate in activities, were unable to heal from their traumas, worried about public safety, or if they faced exclusions in the humanitarian system or through social discrimination. The point is that these networks mattered just as much, if not more, to the financial lives of our respondents than financial services themselves. Financial services were only part of the solution in helping to build financial health. So if we care about refugee outcomes and their possible contributions to the countries where they are stuck in this protracted displacement, we have no choice but to put refugee rights, these foundational rights, back on the global agenda. Financial services cannot be a workaround, and we need to insist on the fundamentals of inclusion. Only then will meso-level solutions help to contribute to the kinds of outcomes that all of us care about. Thank you for your attention. I'd now like to hand over to Maria Teresa for a short recap on the findings from Mexico.
During June and July of 2019, myself and another Fletcher School researcher, Tanya Smith, conducted 33 in-depth interviews in Tijuana, Mexico, with Haitian and Central American migrants from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, as well as 13 interviews with key informants. Our research uncovered that in Mexico, migrants require a valid visa or residency card to send and receive remittances. Those who lacked proper documentation had to rely on new acquaintances, neighbors, and employers to access money transfer services for a fee. Even when in possession of a residency card, banks in Mexico remained inaccessible to many refugees and migrants, as new regulations required foreign nationals to present a valid passport, a Mexican social security number, a residency card, a Mexican phone number, and an email address. Even a Central American diplomat expressed frustration upon being denied the opportunity to open a bank account multiple times after living in Tijuana for over 6 months. Upon arrival, most respondents were dependent on the charity of their family, either back home or in the US, their networks in Tijuana, and religious organizations for housing and for food. As they accessed jobs, their livelihoods progressed, and in the case of most Haitians and some Central Americans, this led to the integration into the formal economy, furthering their education, opening bank accounts, and even acquiring health insurance. Our Haitian and Central American respondents use the same money transfer operators than the local population and looked forward to banking, as many formal employment opportunities were only accessible if they had bank accounts for their employers to deposit their wages. Most of our respondents expressed living in a state of limbo, hoping for the day they could cross into the United States and start their long-awaited life. This was particularly true for Central Americans, who were at the mercy of their scheduled court dates, always hoping the next hearing would enable them to fight their asylum claim within U.S. borders. This uncertainty prohibited them from investing in a future in Tijuana, keeping children out of schools, remaining dependent on migrant shelters for refuge, and absolutely crippling their self-reliance. Even our Haitian respondents, who appear to have made Tijuana their new home, would confess they too remain strong in their desire to move into the U.S. Needless to say, most of our respondents in Mexico were far from financially healthy.
Thank you so much, Hans-Martin, Julie, Swati, Maria, for this excellent overview of the findings. We all really have a clearer idea now of the main findings and the difficult realities refugees face in all of the countries we discussed. With this background, we will move now into a discussion on the policy implications of these findings. And we'll focus particularly on the Kenya and Jordan situation. I'm going to hand over the floor to Radha Rashkochia. She's a Chief Research and Policy Officer at the Innovation for Poverty Action. And she has really been a key partner to the policy side of this research partnerships. She's going to moderate the session for the next more or less half an hour. So we will have a break starting at 3:20 Central European Time or 9:20 US Eastern Time. So Radha, I'm passing over the floor to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you today, and thanks to all of the speakers so far on really insightful findings, but also useful provocation, I think, for the discussion that we'll have now. So I'd like to invite our panelists to switch on their videos and join the discussion. So I'm delighted today that we have with us Maha Bahu, who's the CEO of Jordan Payments and Clearing Company, affectionately known as JOPAC. And she'll be speaking about JOPAC's mandated with enhancing and promoting digital payments as a driver for digital financial inclusion. And so we're delighted to have her sharing her experience. Maha's also been a strong advocate for refugee financial inclusion in Jordan, so we're keen to hear her insights. We also have joining us Meshach Mwololo, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing, who is joining us from UNHCR in Kenya, where he's the Livelihoods and Economic Inclusion Officer. And finally, we're also joined by Daphne Jayasinghe, who's the head of policy for Europe for the International Rescue Committee. So welcome to all of you. I'd also encourage everyone who's joining, all the participants, please do feel free to raise questions through the chat. We'll be monitoring that. So if there are questions that you would like to pose to our participants, our panelists today, then we'll be tracking those. So Maha and Meshach, I'll start with the two of you, and maybe we'll start, Maha, if I can turn to you first. So we heard a lot about the findings here, and I think having the individual level stories just puts into context some of the challenges that displaced populations are facing, and also the very challenging, and I saw the chat conversation as well. Both Jordan and Kenya have also been incredibly generous in terms of their hosting of these large populations of displaced people for many years. So this is clearly a very challenging situation for the government, for regulatory bodies, and in both Jordan and Kenya. Can you share just from your own experience? It would be wonderful to hear, how do these findings resonate with your own experiences, and where are both some of the key challenges, but also enablers that you've seen developing in your context? So Maha, I'll start with you.
you very much for this good opportunity to talk about this very important and critical subject in Jordan, especially that we have a huge number of refugees in Jordan. Actually, before talking about the challenges facing refugees, let's talk about challenges facing even Jordanian in access to financial services. When we started and we announced our commitment as the first central bank in the world to commit towards refugees to facilitate access to finance for them, at that time, the financial inclusion rate was only 24.6% in Jordan. So refugees, definitely less than that. And to be honest, I'm coming from two refugee parents, mother and father. And I know at the early stage, you explained the phases of refugees when they are forced to move to another country. The main concern is they are scared, they are shocked, they are fragile, they lack resources, and they rely on receiving cash assistance from humanitarian agencies. And the most important thing, their perception that it's a very temporary and short period of time, so we don't need to work or to search for anything. We are here just a period of time until we move back. This is one of the concerns. I will talk about the demand side before talking about the challenges from the supply side. The other one is they lack, from the demand side, they are scared to deal with the financial system that they are not familiar with. Even before migrating to our country, most likely they never had access to financial services. And what we need, because especially inside the camps, they are not allowed to hold cash. So they take coupons for food, for other services. And they are so scared to work or to earn another income. So the humanitarian agencies would stop the cash assistance, which they prefer. From the supply side, to be very frank, I'm here today, I will be very honest, because that's what you need in this discussion. From the supply side, there are many challenges. Documentation, and this is the same even for Jordanians or expats. As they mentioned in Mexico, even diplomats would face. These are all the unintended consequences of FATF recommendations, driving the market for more of de-risking, debanking, and financial exclusion. Banks are not willing, or financial institutions, to take the risk. Refugees are perceived as higher risks, even augmented risks. When we talk about financial inclusion, not access to work, I'm still now talking about financial services. They are not profitable for the banks. 700 years for banks till today, they left half of the world unbanked because banks would chase those who are wealthy, those who are profitable. I would never be interested as a CEO of a bank, for example, to chase refugees with $100 or $200 that they will immediately cash out because they need the money. Giving them credit facilities, highly risk. What if they leave out of a sudden, they go back home? Who they are, especially when they come from conflicting area, not because of natural or environmental catastrophe. If they are coming from war zone, we might even say, oh, what about if they are terrorists? What about if they are laundering money or whatsoever? So many challenges, cultural, literacy, risk perception, so many challenges. Whatever we do, it's not easy. And another final thing, not to take longer time, today, the whole world, or the whole population of the world, are forcibly displaced. For now, 14 months, I'm forcibly displaced in this room, working from home, not allowed to socialize, not allowed to go out, not allowed to travel. So we understand even the frustration. So not shocked, not scared. We live in our homeland, surrounded by friends and relatives, though we cannot meet them face to face. We are forcibly displaced. So maybe we should reconsider everything, not only refugees, who are forcibly displaced because they were obliged to leave their homeland. Hopefully I answered your question about the main challenges.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Maha. Meshach, maybe we can turn to you now for the perspective, for a perspective from Kenya too.
Yeah. Thank you, Radha. Yeah, from the Kenyan context, in terms of barriers that sort of affect financial inclusion for refugees, range from the fact that a number of legal statutes or frameworks that govern the financial sector, and in this regard, one of the key barrier is regards documentation for refugees, whereby the Kenya, the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act provides certain documentation requirements for purposes of verification. And in essence, the refugee ID, which is provided for in the current Refugee Act, is omitted. Then this presents a challenge in terms of due diligence, especially by financial service providers. And I think that's where the biggest problem is, because in as much as we have engaged with a lot of financial service providers trying to advocate for inclusion, then the challenge of regulatory requirement arises, whereby compliance is strictly enforced by the Central Bank of Kenya. That challenge, and together with also other emerging requirements, like in terms of know your customer clients, like the fact that a refugee is required to have a Kenya Revenue Authority PIN for tax purposes, whereby the administration process of acquiring this is also sort of a challenge. Then this presents a formidable barrier in terms of refugees being able to open formal bank accounts and also accessing mobile money, as Julie has already mentioned that Kenya has a vibrant mobile money ecosystem. So in that sense, we see that refugees have to adopt, other alternative approaches to be able to participate within the financial ecosystem. Also, I think in terms of opportunities for financial inclusion, we have been able to see refugees being able to caucus and form what we call village savings and loans associations, or community savings and loans associations. And through these groupings, they are able to save, they are able to support each other in terms of welfare, consumption, and also in their entrepreneurial activities. And through this programming, we have also been able to identify opportunities for financial inclusion through the microfinance sector. And in this sense, this is due to a sort of, I don't know if I would call it sort of a lacuna in terms of regulatory enforcement, whereby MFIs are able to, to function without necessarily being heavily regulated by the central bank in the sense of the KYC requirements. Therefore, we devised an advocacy strategy here, and we engaged with the ILO also, and the Umbrella Association for Microfinance Institutions, where we were able to sort of have engaging conversations. First, to also just raise the awareness on, seeing refugees as potential clientele to these MFIs. I think from the onset, we were able to see that there is misconception that refugees, are these people who need, care and maintenance approaches rather than being viewed as, potential clients like any other Kenyan national. So we had a number of engagements with different refugee entrepreneurs, and also from some of these engagements, we saw the perception of the MFIs changing, and actually seeing that refugees are actually a clientele base like any other that they have within their portfolios, and we saw a readiness to actually engage and extend their services to refugees. And from that time henceforth, we have been having engagements, and which are going to culminate into a memorandum of understanding with some of the MFIs and also with ILO to be able to work together to enhance financial inclusion for refugees. Over to you, Radha.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great, and it's great to hear. It's great to hear some of those examples of where you've been able to fill that gap between just the absence of services and then services that seem to be out of reach. Mahab, I wanted to turn back to you to see if you have any responses in terms of thinking about the ecosystem of potential services that are available. One of the findings that Swati and Julie both spoke about was just this need to try and mainstream services as much as possible. So not to have distinct services that are geared specifically or designed specifically for displaced populations, but to try and think of them within the broader ecosystem. From the context in Jordan, and just from your experience in working with digital payment options, how realistic is that that we can think about the development of payment and of financial services, but with an inclusive view of engaging refugees and displaced populations?
Thank you very much for this question. First of all, allow me to say that I prefer not to discriminate between the services, so specific services for refugees, specific services for Jordanians. I prefer to look deeper into what they need, how to fulfill their needs, and how to design something that would really meet their needs and fulfill their expectations, but without like branding or labeling these services are for refugees. For that reason, when we launched our digital financial services, not only for mobile wallets, because we also allowed basic bank accounts for refugees and Jordanians who cannot fulfill the minimum requirement balance of normal accounts. What we did at JOPAC, we started to invent and try to innovate approaches to really reach and live with refugees and genders and all vulnerable or excluded segments, youth, etc., to know what they need. So we invented something we call digital experiments, which is like a kind of intervention in the way of the current business, the awareness programs, the literacy programs, the communication strategy, everything. So we select a group of our targeted, which we did for refugees, more than one digital experiment. We communicate with them, we introduce our intervention, One was for loyalty programs, one for different usages, escorting them with the journey to eliminate the taboo of fear, to deal with these things, the onboarding, microfinancial services, microfinance. So we tried to do that, and the results were outstanding. What we conduct the test or the experiment on a group, we compare before and after, we compare with the A group, with the B group, not exposed or be under experiments. Once we find good results, so we disseminate the knowledge to all the market players, we reward this segment under experiment. I believe that was something for me. I'm so proud that we did that at JOPAC. And another advantage of that, instead of going to customize something and put a huge investment, and later on, wow, it didn't work, we're not reaping any benefit out of it. No, very limited investment in time, in money, or in anything. And once we don't find the outcome as we expected, we tweak some of the way we conduct things. And after that, we disseminate the knowledge and try to share benefits with the whole market. After that, we conducted market survey with Ipsos, doing this on Jordanians as a host community for refugees, the national aid funds, the most vulnerable communities of Jordanians. And we found that the satisfaction level is by far higher than before. And most of the respondents, 82%, claimed that they intend to keep on using digital financial services, as they found many of the usages. Still, system is nothing to be compared with M-Pesa. I know that, but it is fulfilling their needs, especially with COVID and the limitation and restrictions on people's mobility. They found it, wow, easy to transfer money to friends or to receive support from other community members, and to pay bills, especially the very important bills that they cannot live without, like electricity, water, or airtime, internet. So for them, they felt amazing. However, we discovered what is still critical for them, or what is still like pain for them. So we put a plan with the whole market player and with the financial regulator, how to change, how to incentivize the market, or how to rectify these pains for the most vulnerable segments of the population. Believe me, Rada, poor people in Jordan and refugees outside the camp, they have the same pattern of life, same challenges, same inflow, cash inflow and outflow, same expenses. So maybe if this research was conducted, because look, you're talking about Jordan, Kenya, Uganda, Mexico, all of them are poor countries, or at least like the middle countries. So the hosting community is really, are really in huge challenges, and we face problems. Imagine today with the COVID-19, the unemployment rate among youth is 46%. So maybe if I want to recruit people, I would maybe give a priority to nationals. This is normal. But if I want to pay less, I will find who will accept less money. So this is very normal. Challenges facing these countries, maybe the study or the research, if it includes a chapter of comparison between refugees and the poor and hosting communities, that would really give us better idea. So it's not like discriminating refugees, or we're not allowing them to open business or to give them credit facilities. Banks today are not easily grant any facilities because they are rescheduling and they are writing off many of the non-performing loans for Jordanians and for good corporates who fell into bankruptcy or whatsoever. So not only with COVID-19, COVID-19 attacked the planet with many critical and persistent challenges and problems. So I think, especially Jordan, it's not discriminating refugees. Definitely, this is normal when you have people coming, competing for the limited jobs, competing for the limited resources. Jordan is the second poorest country in water. So maybe it's normal when we feel, wow, we are not welcoming them. Believe me, most of people don't feel like that, but they are competing with us. Honestly, though we are really willing. Maybe I'm talking about myself and the community surrounding me, who I'm confident about their genuinity. Maybe we are willing even to share food, to share our houses with them, but it's not the case for poor people who are already suffering. I don't know, Rada, if I answered your question or if you need more elaboration on that. But again, bottom line, I don't prefer to design something for them. I don't prefer to label any of the services. This service is for poor or for refugees. I prefer to tweak some of the things to try to be smart, to explore what they need exactly. So we do it in a way to serve them without letting them feel, wow, this one only for poor people. Even wallets in Jordan, I have 2 wallets, my children have wallets. So it's not branded or labeled for poor people or excluded, financially excluded people. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maha. No, and I think you touched on a lot of good points. I think the idea of thinking about, I think one of the findings that we found very compelling from the research was around the financial health framework, because it puts the emphasis not on whose financial health, but just the financial health as an outcome and what that requires. So whether you are a refugee, displaced person, or if you're a host, a poor host national, then the framework could still apply. I'd like to invite Daphne now. Daphne, would you? You've been looking at some of the policy recommendations in the 2 contexts. We have a few minutes left. I'm getting pinged about our time running out. So with a few minutes left, it'd be great to just hear a little bit from you on what you see as some of the threads, across the 2 countries, and then what can be done. There's obviously huge differences between the 2 countries that we're speaking about as well. So let's not overstate that, but where do you see the common threads, and what are some of those opportunities that we might have at the global level to keep pushing some of these policy discussions?
Great, thank you, Rada. Thank you, Maha and Mashak. I agree. There are consistencies in both the research findings and those points that you have just shared, as well as distinctions. And I think it's helpful to pull out some of those consistencies. And I wanted to respond in particular, Maha, to your point on the importance of mainstream services. That was a key finding of our report, of our research, that those kind of specialized services actually act as forms of exclusion, whereas mainstream services can help with that financial integration, as Julia referred to it. And that also speaks to your point about the importance of social networks. That was a very strong finding in a number of the contexts that we worked in. How do we facilitate that integration that is so part of the financial health of the populations that we serve? And so that was a finding that both of you referred to with regards to how to work with host populations, and to Mashak, to your point on VSLAs and MFIs. I think something else that it'd be important to pull out that's consistent across the context, and both of you raised, is of course the importance of documentation. So a key finding, our number 1 finding, is those foundational rights for financial inclusion depend on equal access, on appropriate documentation to facilitate access to livelihoods, to diverse livelihoods, so we don't stay in that survivalihood phase. You know, the very troubling image of that flatlining is something that's key to escape from, move out of that mode, by addressing the systemic barriers. I think the other thing that it'd be key to point to is the financial health framework. It's clear from everything both of you are saying and from the findings of the research that there's more to financial inclusion than financial services. It relies on financial health across the board, and that model of financial health is certainly important, but I think a key sort of next step policy recommendation is for the multiple stakeholders to think about how we set the benchmarks for refugee financial health, drawing on the evidence that we've generated in this research, but also potentially thinking as a multi-stakeholder community of practitioners, policymakers, and researchers to develop those benchmarks. Just thinking on to the next steps, I think we have a number of opportunities that lie ahead to build on this evidence base and these findings at the national level, but also at the global level. And I would emphasize that those policy changes require a multi-stakeholder grouping of private sector, donor governments, host governments, humanitarian organizations. So just a recognition of the importance of the roadmap to financial inclusion that was referred to at the beginning, that brings those communities together to sort of to build on the findings of this research and draw out the evidence and respond to it, so that we address in a nuanced and context appropriate way some of the challenges, some of the specific stages of refugee livelihoods moving in those stages that were identified: arrival phase, survivalhood phase, and hopefully the ratcheting phase that we would want to see, where we see diverse financial services accessed, and that diversity of opportunities. Those are steps that we need to build on, and I think we can see opportunities in the year ahead with the Global Compact on refugees, with the next iteration of the Grand Bargain as key moments to tap into.
Terrific. Okay, well, thank you. I know we could probably talk about this for a lot longer, and looking at the chat, it seems like there's some lively discussion too. Unfortunately, we are out of time now, but I wanted to thank Maha and Mashak and Daphne for their contributions. And with that, I'll hand over to Annelien again.
Thank you so much. Yes, this was such a great discussion. And I think if you're willing to stay a bit longer, and we'll have a chance for Q&A later on as well, so we could potentially continue some of the discussion in the Q&A later. But now we're heading into a break. So we all have about 10 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes, just to go away, stretch your legs, take a coffee. And then we'll be back for the panel discussion, which Karen and Kim will dive straight into. So yeah, see you soon. See you back in 10 minutes.
Great. If we could start bringing everybody back in, that would be fantastic. Terrific. And team, if we could get our next panelists in our room, that would be very appreciated. That would be Mariam Zahari, Stephanie Scharf, Kenneth Trejo, Mayada El-Zogbi, and my colleague, Karen Jacobson. And I saw Kenneth earlier.
And we have Joël Boutrou.
Excellent. Welcome, Joël.
Mute. Yes, hi.
Hello, greetings.
Hello.
Greetings, Stephanie. And I know Kenneth is out there because I saw him earlier. So while we wait for Kenneth, maybe we should just do a quick round of introductions. My name is Kim Wilson. I am on the faculty of the Fletcher School and was involved with both of these studies. So welcome, everybody. Karen, may I ask you to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Jacobson. I'm a professor here at the Fletcher School in Boston, Medford, and I've been involved with the Uganda and Mexico parts of the study.
Terrific. And Mariam?
Hi, I am Mariam Zahari. I am representing the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, which is a network of central banks and ministries of finance from nearly 90 jurisdictions in the Global South. And I currently lead our work stream on the financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons, as well as on aligning financial inclusion and AML-CFT policy outcomes. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. And Stephanie?
Yes, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephanie Scharf. I'm head of the Division on Forced Displacement and Migration at the German Development Ministry, BMZ. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Fantastic. And Joël? Oops, you're on mute. Sorry, Joël, you're on mute.
Yeah, I could not unmute. You have to yeah, so Joël Boutrou, I'm the UNHCR rep in Uganda. Hi.
Thank you. Welcome. And Mayada?
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Mayada El-Zogbi. I'm the managing director of the Center for Financial Inclusion, which is a think tank based in Washington, D.C., housed at Axiom International. And I'm joining because of our work that CFI has done on financial health, but also I myself have done quite a bit of work on refugees and migrants.
Fantastic. And Kenneth, welcome.
Thank you.
Kenneth, if you can put your laptop a little, there you go, perfect.
Okay, so I've just joined.
So we're just, yeah, we're just saying who we are and the institution we work for.
Okay, great. My name is Kenneth Trejo. I work with Uganda Communications Commission, the regulator of communication services in Uganda. And specifically, I'm interested in this topic of discussion because Uganda is so much interested in the mobile money services, mobile finance. It is one of the biggest areas of commerce that has been growing at a rapid speed. and Uganda Communications Commission being a regulator of telecommunication companies, and also mobile phone being a facilitator of the mobile financial services, is where UCC is in partnership with we have an MOU with the central bank to have an oversight over the digital financial services, and specifically we've been helping the refugees in accessing the services of mobile finance. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we go into a dialogue amongst ourselves, I thought I'd quickly say this, which is we talked about Kenya, Mexico, and Jordan, but we really haven't discussed Uganda. And Uganda is a country apart. This is a country where we did see ratcheting happen over time, where people could grow their livelihoods. So if you recall, our first finding is that in order for financial inclusion to have a positive impact, you have to have foundational structures in place, which means rights. So financial inclusion is not going to have much of an impact unless these foundational issues are addressed. The need for and use of financial services co-evolves with livelihood growth. So we don't need to force financial services on people. They're going to evolve as their livelihoods diversify and grow. And this was very clear in Uganda. The third finding, that financial services need, providers don't need to create brand new services to be relevant. In fact, quite the opposite. We want mainstream services. Again, that was very present in Uganda. The fourth finding was that in displacement, the uncertainty of durable livelihoods discourages people from making investments. Again, we saw people investing in Uganda because they could see a livelihood path for themselves. We're not saying everyone we interviewed said that. What we're saying is there were definitely a lot of people that were ratcheting their livelihoods towards a durable solution. And the last is that financial health was a useful framework for us to think of outcomes as opposed to just process. If you think of financial inclusion, it's about access. But it's not really about outcomes. So we found that helpful. So now let's start, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Karen, to get us going.
Great, thank you so much. And it's great to have you all here with us today. And we'd love to have you talk a little bit about some of our findings, but I want to start off to see if you have any response to the earlier panel, and also whether you have any response to our framework, our financial health framework, which we are proposing is a advance, if you like, conceptual advance on older frameworks, and particularly on the financial inclusion framework, which is very much about processes, about how people become drawn into existing financial institutions. Our financial health framework is trying to develop a set of benchmarks or indicators that focus on what has actually happened to a person. It's the same kind of framework that could be used for non-displaced people like you, like any of us. Some of us are indeed displaced. But we're looking at particular indicators to see whether people are financially healthy. And we can use this as a way to assess progress and to assess whether in fact financial services do help people become financially healthy, or whether there are other more important things going on in a host community or a host society that help people become financially healthy. But one of the reasons why we focus on this framework is because we believe that financial health is a really important aspect of what happens to refugees. The most important aspect, because it underpins whether people can find housing, whether people can put their children in school and make progress that way, and having access, being financially healthy, having access to income, savings, managing your debt, these kinds of things are crucial. We think perhaps most crucial. So we're wondering if you have any response to that, dear panelists. So that's one thing we're going to talk about today. Kim, other things we're going to talk about?
Yes, we'll get to those, but let's have a reaction from Mayada, who actually, the Center for Financial Inclusion adopted sort of the Western model of what financial health was and brought financial health in a developmental context. So Mayada, we'd love your reaction.
Sure. Yeah, I have a very complex set of ideas on financial health. So let me see if I can get those out clearly. So we love the idea of going beyond access. We love the idea going beyond financial inclusion. So the idea of going towards outcomes is absolutely something that we agree with. And I think that when CFI tried to adapt the framework that was first developed by CSFI, Financial Health Network, in the United States to developing context, that was what we had in mind. What we found was the contextual situations in these countries actually had a lot to say about people's outcomes. And so, so we kind of left it there and said, okay, we measure financial health about how people are doing, and it's narrowly defined in these ways that actually capture what people are doing in terms of their individual choices, their individual behaviors, their individual decisions. But we recognize that there's these contextual things that actually matter more. And in some ways, what you've just done is exactly the same, which is you've basically said, yes, this is a measurement framework that helps us assess how people are doing, but bottom line, the foundational issues around whether people have jobs, whether have access to employment in their host countries, whether people have identification systems that allow them to actually participate in the financial system, all of these other variables actually are the drivers behind whether people are financially healthy or are doing better in life in general. Now, I'll tell you why I'm not a fan of the framework, the measurement framework in general now. And the reason it has to do with when you see how it is rolled out in practice. So when your objective is a policy objective, I think the framework falls short of clarifying the policy decisions that policymakers need to make. And you see this really explicitly in the United States, where this was first used and tested. And it was used, let me just give you a little bit of history. It was developed in the United States for providers. So providers were the universe, not necessarily policymakers. And it was to help providers understand the health of their customers, with the idea that providers could then make some adaptations in their products to improve people's financial health. Now, taken to the policy level in the United States, the main policy message has been, poor people don't save. They don't save $400 for an emergency. We need to solve people's behaviors around savings. Now, what I would hate to see would be that this kind of framework then translates into the same kind of policy results in other countries. When we know, and you've identified in your main findings, that the right to employment is critical. And so I would love to see a framework that extends beyond people's decisions, how they use money, how they manage their debt, to include contextual factors. And to me, that would actually, I think, serve our purpose, which is to try to actually give a solution set that goes beyond just the decisions of individuals, but also the context in which they live.
Thank you for that. Mariam, I wonder if you would like to comment on that. So what I'm taking away is that the framework in the US is applied towards people's behaviors and decisions, but actually that's not what we're proposing. Our framework is really about policy. And so we'll take what you say with a great deal of respect, but I would have to say, I'm not convinced that financial health and its outcomes are not a good thing to be looking at when we are looking at people's financial lives. Mariam, do you want to respond?
I do. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, we would agree with this finding. But secondly, I think it's incorrect to think that financial inclusion stops there because, for example, from our perspective, financial inclusion is a means to an end. It's not an end to itself, and we don't think otherwise. And this can be demonstrated, for example, by what national financial inclusion strategies look like nowadays. We define financial inclusion of the population, including refugees in some contexts, as not just accessing formal financial services, but using formal financial services that have high quality, that can be accessed conveniently, and that can also contribute to financial health, essentially. But, and thirdly, I think the way that this can happen on a policy level, at the country level, is how the National Financial Inclusion Strategy and financial inclusion policy is informed by the country's, for example, national development agenda or wider economic agenda. And this also demonstrates the interdisciplinary nature of this policy challenge and how we would need to devise solutions going forward. So just those 3 points from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So what I'd like to do now is we're saying financial health may be useful, but we have to watch out that it doesn't become this narrow measurement tool. And like so many of these frameworks do, they hem us in when there's huge policies at stake, and then we're sort of shoehorned to this little tiny thing. We don't want to do that. So Mayada, thank you for reminding us of that, and Mariam as well. Now, we have another finding which suggests that financial services such as remittances and cash assistance are a high priority. So we're not saying no financial services. We're saying that financial services, the use of them will evolve as their livelihoods evolve. But on day one, a lot of people need cash assistance and they need their remittances for the lucky few who are actually getting remittances. So what we saw that in some cases, refugees are struggling to access even the services that they want. And this, in fact, actually happened in Uganda. And in Uganda, the UCC, which Kenneth is part of, and the UNHCR, which Joel is part of, came together and said, let's look at this issue together. We want inclusion to happen. So we'd love to hear what the background is, was why were people unincluded back in 2019? Why were refugees stopped from using financial services through a SIM card? And maybe one of you could describe the background of that. Why was it removed as a possibility? And then what did you do to make it happen? Turn the switch back on again. So Kenneth, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thank you, Kim. To give the background, in Uganda, when the law was very clear that to get a SIM card registered under the KYC, know your customer, you needed to have a national ID, or if you're a foreigner, you needed to have a passport. So the case of refugees initially was actually omitted in the law. And what happened, because we have a national database for the nationals, and then the passports for foreigners, the database was very clear. So we were still having a few challenges with the refugees in the country. So when we started the registration of SIM cards, the telecom operators were required to take biometric registration so that the biometrics at the SIM card registration center could be matching with the biometrics at the national identification database. Now, because of that loophole, we had given sort of an exemption to refugees, so that if you have a refugee card, you can actually be allowed to register. But then we didn't know what was going to hit us as a country. A lot of fraud started coming in because the SIM card, because we have a standard that when you have a SIM, for you to get a SIM card, you cannot get more than 10 SIM cards, at least per national identity card, matched to one NIN. But then, because there was no match between the database of UNHCR and Office of the Prime Minister with the database that the telecom operators were having, then people started abusing, especially those who were registering the SIM cards. So you'd go with the SIM card, I mean, you'd go with a national ID, I mean, with an ID of the refugees to the telecom operator, and then they would make multiple SIM cards, and the rule of 10 SIM cards was not applicable. The national, I mean, the ID of refugees was somehow open, and if most of the fraudsters and most of the criminals were found to be using the IDs of refugees. And when we went further to investigate with the Uganda police, we actually realized, because our team even visited the refugee camps and realized that actually these refugees, most of them were even innocent. I think even all of them were innocent. They didn't know that actually their cards were being abused by the criminal gangsters and the fraudsters. So as the UCC, we had to temporarily put a ban on registration of SIM cards for the refugees until we had to get a solution on how to solve this issue. So at that point, that's when the UCC got in touch with UNHCR to get a way of bringing back these refugees on the SIM card registration. And indeed, it was really, really a big issue. It was really a country outcry, but we got together with the UNHCR to make sure that the issue is resolved as quickly as possible. So what we did, the Commission together with the UNHCR put up an APN where the SIM card, where the database of refugees at the office of UNHCR would be the same database was given to the telecom operators, so that now when a refugee goes to the SIM card SIM card registration center and the biometrics are taken, would be actually matching with the biometrics of the same refugee that would be at the office of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And that's how we solved it. And from there onwards, the refugees started registration and everything got back on track. That's how, briefly, how we solved this problem. But basically, the issue in Uganda was not really on the side of the refugees. The problem was that there was already a loophole that was identified by the fraudsters, and they started abusing the leeway that the Commission had given to the refugees. Thank you.
Thank you. So you harmonized your databases, and then everybody could re-register and have done so. And
yes.
Which is a noble solution. I'm wondering if people lost their savings in the meantime that were using their old, that had their previous SIM cards. How did they re-access any savings that they had been able to put on that?
No, because what actually happened, those who had the SIM cards were opened for the service. What was needed was to regularize the process, have your SIM card properly registered, and then you can continue with your wallet functioning very well. The challenge that we were having then was to have new people who wanted to get SIM cards that were actually being excluded, and that was the biggest problem with this issue that we're having in the country.
Right. Thank you for that. Joel, may I turn to you now? And you can certainly respond to the SIM card situation, but also maybe to tell us a little bit about Uganda and what that you've seen there in terms of being economically welcoming.
Yeah, maybe to respond to complement what Kenneth has said, and to which I agree. But the context was in fact that we were trying to do a one-time shot in Kampala for the 50,000 plus refugees registered in Kampala in particular, at the same time as the government was distributing cash also to its citizens in the poorest, let's say, quarters of Kampala. So we're trying to complement that, recognizing that as a result of COVID, many people lost their livelihood, in particular in Kampala, where the refugees are not assisted, apart from specific cases. But it proved, that Kenneth said, a very slow process, because indeed, while we had a memorandum understanding with UCC, the other companies, the private companies, Airtel and others, had difficulty recognizing in the first phase the refugee card itself. So that was sorted out. But then the process of triangulating information between the SIM card, the ID card, and the person responding the phone was extremely slow, to the extent that after a while, after 2 months of very slow progress, we had to resort sort of to a bank called Post Bank, which was where the bank, a mobile bank, came in a designated area, thousands of refugees lined up, got their cash, moved on, which is what is happening generally, by the way, in terms of cash distribution in Uganda, despite the fact that we, with WFP, started opening bank accounts, by the way, for refugees, like in a settlement called Imvepi. Almost 2 years ago, we opened bank accounts for everybody. But we didn't continue because at that time, the charges, the bank charges on bank accounts and charges on mobile phone or mobile money were varying. So at one point we had to put a sort of, we had to suspend temporarily, saying, no, let's see where it is going, because we didn't want to put like a few dollars, say, in a bank account of a refugee, or that to see the money eaten away by charges, whatever type of thing like that. Because let's not forget that we're talking about small money here, not huge amount of money. Let me come back and backtrack a bit on what you said earlier on. Indeed, most refugees, not all, most refugees prefer cash to in-kind support. But what we have found out after a couple of years, for example, in several settlements where WFP distributed cash and in other settlements where they distributed food, the poverty line was not markedly different. So cash is not a magic wand either, okay? So it's not an end in itself either. As much as we're trying to say cash is better, and generally refugees prefer cash because they can diversify their otherwise extremely monotonous support they receive. You know, it's not sufficient. I would not talk about investments, by the way. I would talk about savings. Huh? Indeed, people try to save, but you know, for example, we're supporting, meaning we and other partners, like several thousand, what we call VSLA. So it's Village Saving and Loan Associations, something like that. So, and these people who put their money together, and then in turn, they get, you know, sometimes they can loan on the basis of what they've saved, or they can get, you know, the savings of the people in it's their turn and so on. So we have this VSLA, but all that is about generally savings, and sometimes also we for sort of micro project. All right. So again, it's more indeed saving than investments. And we're talking also, let's not forget, we're talking about survival mode here. Huh? Let's not forget either that even if we manage to monetize most of the assistance, by the way, small parenthesis, not for new arrivals, because politically it's not palatable. Giving cash upon arrival, although it would be convenient in a way, although not always very practical, frankly, would be seen as trying to create a pull factor towards Uganda. And the Ugandan authorities, like any authorities, would find that probably over the top. So we backtracked on that one, and the Office of the Prime Minister was not in favor, and frankly, I agree with them. In the present circumstances, creating an additional pull factor towards Uganda in an otherwise erratic region is not politically, you cannot sell that. So that aside, indeed, so we're trying to monetize as much as we can. The assistance, it remains fairly small levels of assistance, because beside that, we still have to continue doing, I would say, blanket support, especially for basic services. And now people would say, oh, we can do a conditional cash transfer type of thing. But this, I think, fails to recognize that it would be okay if it were over and above the necessary support we need to give to existing, by the way, government structure, health, education, and so on. So I don't know, you know, again, whether cash is indeed becoming a priority. The environment in Uganda is ripe. We can indeed normally open bank accounts. Refugees can work in theory. They need to get work permit maybe, but it's not, people do work despite COVID. People are free to move around, to live wherever they want. The only thing that assistance is provided at settlement level, that's what it is. But in terms of indeed financial inclusion, the refugees are not markedly treated differently than Ugandans. It's just that many of the refugees in Uganda are in areas which themselves suffer from a poor outreach when it comes to bank services and so on. But just one last word, if I may, because of the refugee presence in certain areas, and let's not forget that very often in these areas, in the north in particular, but not only, the settlements are the biggest villages or towns of the area. So because of their presence, some banks are starting to open subsidiaries in these areas because of the refugee presence.
Wow, that's really interesting. So refugees are helping develop the market for the supply side. Very interesting. I want to switch gears a little bit and toss out a question to Karen, who's actually going to bring the rest of you into the question, which is another of our findings, and you heard a lot about this, is that when refugees and migrants lack identity documents and work permits, they are forced to use underground services. They're driven underground. We have many examples of refugees borrowing or buying ID documents from other refugees and locals. And so, Karen, I want to turn this over to you. What are the policy implications of this, of people not having the IDs? And what happens if they do have the IDs? What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, first I'd like to toss back to Joël, because it sounds like Uganda does not have this problem. I mean, it's widely recognized that one of the biggest problems refugees face is the issue of identity documents, whether it's residence permits in Egypt or yellow cards or asylum cards or whatever the refugee identification is that enables them to manage their lives, not to be stopped on the street in South Africa. If you don't have the right documentation, you can be deported. So the issue of identification is crucial, but it sounds to me as though this is not an issue in Uganda. And so what we'd like to talk about, Joel and Kenneth, I'd love you to comment on that, but also for other countries, or perhaps in Uganda too, if you don't have the right ID, does a market emerge for IDs? We know that whenever a very crucial resource is needed, a market emerges for it, in this case, a black market. We've seen in many cases how you yourself, Kenneth, mentioned the problem of fraud, but we also see how identity cards, whether it's SIM cards or other kinds of ID, can be sold and traded. And people can be exploited around this. So I'm wondering if this is an issue. The reason it's an important issue is because it has major implications for host governments. If you have a growing black market or illegal sector that is providing an illegal resource, this is a problem, a policy problem, a problem of civil society for governments. And it surely should be the case that governments are not wanting to have this happen, in which case we push them toward wanting to facilitate the provision of ID documents. But we see this not happening in many countries. I'm wondering if Uganda is an exception to that, Joël, or others would like to comment on that. Perhaps you could start with Joël. Do you think it's not a problem in Uganda?
I don't, there are two things. First, the ID card, the refugee card, is not necessary to receive assistance. It's another paper that they need to go to distribution. So the ID card is not interesting per se. So in fact, very often when refugees try to cross the border, which they should not do during COVID, very often the ID card is confiscated, but they give it fairly freely because that's not what is important for them. And then they could declare it stolen or lost, and then they get a new card, whatever. Secondly, the refugee ID card, in fact, is more sophisticated than, as far as I know, than the ID cards that is given. I think, Kenneth, correct me if I'm wrong, because what it is based on an international system with the 10 fingers and the iris of the eyes, which is not what I think is integrated into a normal national ID card. So I'm not aware of traffic of ID cards, and I've seen that on several occasions when I went to several border points. In fact, the immigration authorities had hundreds of cards that had confiscated from refugees who were trying to cross back to South Sudan. And then if it had been a traffic, it would not be there. It would have disappeared. In fact, from the immigration officer, it went to the office of the Prime Minister, and then they were supposed to deregister or do spot checks to have the family really leave the country and so on. So as far as I know, there is no such thing as, there have been attempts at falsifying refugee ID cards before, prior to us introducing in 2018 this new system with, again, iris.
You mean the biometrics?
Biometrics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think the biometric approach has resolved some of these issues? At least it's certainly because it's widespread, no? And you get in UNHCR.
It was the biggest probably verification done, I think, at the time using biometrics. This system, the BIMS or Progress V4, whatever, and using indeed the entire refugee population was re-verified using this system. Yes, absolutely. So I think, yeah.
I just want to make a comment from the chats. Julie Zolman, who led the study in Kenya, was saying that in Uganda, actually, the local population was struggling to get the IDs. And even though IDs were happening in Uganda, it was still a very lengthy process. And maybe now that has been sped up. Kenneth, at one point, you might want to comment on that. I also would like to say, Lena has said that in many countries, nobody has IDs. And so this is not an FDP, forcibly displaced person problem alone, which I think is an important thing to consider. And it's what Maha was saying earlier, which is, let's look at what else is going on contextually. It's not just about refugees. I'm wondering if in this ID and biometrics and all of these things, an earlier study I did in Greece and Jordan showed that people didn't want to be tracked and traced, that they were very nervous for a couple of reasons. Reason number one is they were nervous about being a target. And I can say in the Greek camps, people were coming from Syria. There were some pro-government people, there were some anti-government people, and they were terrified of people knowing who was who. So I think that's something we have to take into account. The second is they don't want people peering into their accounts and saying, aha, you received a remittance, and therefore you can't receive cash assistance. So there was a lot of concern about that. Sorry, I think Mayada wants to say something and she can't unmute herself. So if one of us could help her, let me try to do that. Ask to unmute. Mayada, you should be unmuted now. So if you would like to comment on any of this, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to build on what you were just saying, Kim, because I do think, I think when we think about this issue around IDs, I think that fundamentally the most important thing is access to services, what Joelle mentioned. And the way we've been thinking about IDs is that IDs is a pathway to getting service, right? But if we can come up with, this big concern around being targeted, just the protection issues around, we did some research, for example, at CFI in the US around illegal migrants in the United States. And even though cities were offering them municipal IDs, they don't want them because they don't want any government agency to have a database of where to find them, because they didn't trust that the government would not share that data with the immigration services. And so there's real fear and real risk around this issue around IDs, and that's what makes it a little bit different for this population group than others. And so what we should be solving for is access to services. And so in some cases, if UNHCR offers a blanket protection or some kind of system, ID system that allows refugees to get access, but does not actually expose them to, potential, retribution or whatever from government agencies, then that's second best, second tier, but it's still better than nothing.
Great, thank you. Marianne or Stephanie, would you like to comment on this? If people don't have the right IDs, they go underground. I'm curious, Mariam, maybe you first about Afi's perspective on this, because this is very not what KYC was intended to do.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Well, I mean, for us, in the absence of ID, there are ways that a policy solution can address this. For example, and I think this was alluded to in the previous session, is the availability of a tiered CDD framework, which is, of course, it needs to be based on a sound national risk assessment that is led by the government. In order to identify and understand, but also able to mitigate risks associated with the population, as well as the financial inclusion products and services that they are using. Now, this means, for example, that if there is no, if a refugee does not have a UNHCR ID, that the tiered CDD framework will allow them to open a basic bank account, for example, with alternative forms of ID that can prove their identity. So this is one policy solution that we've seen in the network, and I will tell you that it's actually more difficult to achieve than said, because this type of framework, the tiered CDD framework, needs to be achieved through sound coordination between financial inclusion stakeholders, for example, and AML-CFT stakeholders who don't necessarily always work together, or don't work with humanitarian stakeholders like UNHCR, who would have the expertise to deal with the protection issues of the population. I'd like to just share one example from Tanzania where this has been quite successful. Before the central bank, which is of course leading the national financial inclusion efforts, before including refugees in the population in the formal financial system, in order to gain access to credit, savings, insurance, and other services, so more sophisticated formal financial services, the government and the central bank worked closely with the Financial Intelligence Unit on a national risk assessment that would establish the level of risks posed by refugees in the formal financial system. And this assessment, although it's not public, actually informed the development of their second national financial inclusion strategy, which included refugees as a target group, along with other unserved and underserved populations in the country. So this points to something quite critical, which is the effective regulatory coordination between those government agencies, but also the policy signal that the regulator is sending out to financial service providers, for example, because I think a tiered CDD framework can only go so far if there is no regulatory clarity that is provided to the financial service providers to assure them that there won't be any non-compliance fines that would be placed onto them in case they decide to use the flexibility in the tiered CDD framework. That was a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I hope it will. Yeah, so this is something that this is how we would view this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, would you care to comment?
Yes, thank you very much. Before commenting on this question, let me just use this opportunity to underline how impressed I am of the outcome of this research. I'm very happy that with the German contribution, we were able to contribute to this research exercise and also profit from your findings. So really thank you to all the team and to all the participants at this conference today. I found the panel so far very insightful and also directly helpful for our policymaking and for our programming in terms of refugee policy. So coming back also to the question on what does in how far we have to look more on the informality, how do we deal with statelessness in general, and how does this also connect to our refugee policy? So what I find important and what I will definitely take with me also from this research is that what for me became very clear that this is part and parcel of our development approach. Economic opportunities and financial literacy, of course, of refugees, but also of host communities, are at the center of our objectives as a development ministry. So that's why I think we have to check if this research is really already integrated in our approaches, and if we have to see in how far we can and should adapt. For me, this is, of course, also, as some previous speakers said, a rights-based approach, which puts human rights at the center. And that I find important, that we have this coherent setup in view, because in the end, I think I found it also very convincing. It's not only an issue of economic opportunities, it's also an issue of empowerment and of future chances you have in a context where you aim at your own human security and your future perspective. Therefore, I think already, as was said before, for us as policymakers, the key challenge is in contexts where access to identification, to residence cards, to labor and work permits is not always easy, and it's not always a given. Or on the contrary, in most cases, this is a huge challenge. So how do we deal with that as policymakers in refugee policy? And how do we work on the fine line where, of course, we have to put the needs of vulnerable population and refugees at the center, but still we want to convince our partner governments, the host communities, host countries, to follow an integration approach, which is opening up opportunities and giving chances to all people living in the host country. And I think for this, it's also very important to see how we can use the outcomes of this research, not only for beneficiaries of a refugee population, but also use it as general policy recommendation for a partner country to develop its policies in different fields. And also maybe some of the best practices we have developed and check how those can be transferred also to other parts of the population. And what I find very important in this regard, it already came as a point and example of Uganda. What is the impact of a better financial literacy and financial health of refugees on the local economic development? And how can this be seen also as an overall package of a coherent approach and on strengthening sustainable economic development, by also, of course, increasing the consumer base, increasing also the opportunities of gaining an income, which is not a goal in itself. It's not only, of course, helping the self-sufficiency and future chances of refugees, but also contributing to the overall economic development. And I think this point we have to put at the center also of our dialogue with the partner countries, to convince them that this is added value to them all, not only because it's a basic human right, but also because it has a sustainable economic impact.
Great, thank you for that. And I've been looking at the chats, and first of all, we have some people writing in for Kakuma. Welcome. We welcome your voice in all of this. Some of you have been saying in the chats that it's not just about a permit, it's not just about a license, it's more about a pathway. And I think in a sense, Uganda has helped create such a pathway. But the hunger for more durable solutions is coming from other parts and other places. And I thought maybe I would and we're having a whole discussion tomorrow on durable solutions, but I thought maybe if we could touch on what does that mean? What is a durable solution? Because if people don't have it, then they're not going to invest in their own skills or even other assets. If they think that it's easier to be resettled to a third country, or if they think somehow magically something will happen, but they're not going to invest unless there's a pathway. So I'm opening up that to all of you. What does that mean to have a pathway that goes beyond just an ID?
Let me just jump in here for a second. Joelle, as our refugee practitioner on this panel, you of course know well that integration is a a dirty word when it comes to most governments, but not perhaps Uganda. Many people see Uganda as an exceptional host country. And I'm wondering could you comment slightly on that, because so much of what other countries, other host governments, the resistance they have to providing identification, providing work permits and so forth, is because they don't want refugees to become integrated. It's the last thing they want. And so a lot of this is about how host governments is about their resistance to integration, and that they are focused on refugees moving back to home or moving on to be resettled, but not to staying. And so can you comment on whether Uganda is different in this way? But maybe you have some thoughts also on the political situation in Uganda and whether that may be changing, please.
So you're right, Karen, but also indeed, and Kim, I mean, for me, first, durable solution is a very relative term, and it means whatever we want to put into it. You know, what is durable, what is sustainable? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, what does that mean? I always take the example of the agricultural policy of the European Union, which has been subsidizing farmers for 60 years. Is it sustainable or durable? Yes, it is, because they're doing it anyway. So the problem is, you know, that what we mean by sustainability or durable solutions for people in poor countries, that you are on your own. So without the outside support, whereas for rich countries, we do the opposite. So anyway, these small parentheses aside, we don't talk about integration in Uganda. And I think it would create a backlash. I mean, you know, we've got to be realistic too. Although the refugee population is equivalent to maybe 1 year growth, natural growth of Uganda, you know, at 3.2% population growth per year at 44 million, you have a refugee population every year, of course, and increasing, obviously. So we don't talk about integration. It would be silly. It would be unpopular. I don't see the point even of raising this. I mean, the durable solution is back home whenever. I mean, Uganda is open enough to say, we know it may take some time. It's incumbent upon the quote-unquote international community to make, you know, conditions conducive to a return. In South Sudan, maybe forget DRC, I don't know, for a while at least. But at least, you know, we have to create these conditions conducive to a return, because there will be Uganda fatigue at one point that will be stronger than the donor fatigue that we always face in so-called protracted refugee situations. So resettlement, although Uganda is was a big resettlement country when the US had its door open pre-Trump, it was still only at max, if I remember, 4,000 persons departing a year, which is 10%, by the way, the natural growth of the refugee population. Okay, so it's just scratching the surface of the needs, indeed, and so on. You know, so resettlement is an option for a very small minority. People are here, they're investing in their own, to the extent possible, the skills of the children. One of the main reasons why they don't necessarily go to South Sudan. Sometimes they go to South Sudan to pass exam and come back. We have seen a few examples of that, you know. But otherwise, they are investing, but in the future of the children, or they are investing in their own through vocational training, which again only is targeting a small minority because of lack of funding. So people are investing in their future the way they can, but most of the time, like any poor population, they are surviving on a day-to-day basis. So I don't think that because they could be integrated, they will invest more or whatever. I don't necessarily, frankly, see the link, because they do try to cross the border, for example, in South Sudan, to cultivate the land and come back, even more so because of COVID, the livelihood opportunities have decreased, although we have mitigated that, but still, there are less investments from some donors and so on that. So they're investing the way they can, either in their country of origin or where they are here. I will give one example, which is a small example. One of two refugee representatives nationwide who came in all these big meetings and so on. She said one thing that got everybody a bit, you know, emotional, because whenever you have speeches, the government official would say, "Forgotten my country." They always finish like that. And she finished her speech in front of the prime minister. She said, "Forgotten my country of asylum." So everybody said, sort of choked on your emotion and so on, But it means something. It means that, they made Uganda their country. And by the way, for many of these refugees have not been refugees for the first time only. Some have been refugees for 2-3 times. So, is this story of integration versus non-integration, when you have that scale of refugees in a country of that, in that level, quote unquote, of development, I don't like the word, but never mind, it would be very, very theoretical and counterproductive on my side to even raise that as an issue.
Great, thank you. I think what we're going to do is open this up to the audience now for questions. We have a Q&A period. And to kick us off, we have a request from Jean-Pierre, who says he would like to be called out to ask his question on financial inclusion. And he wants to base his comment actually on the earlier dialogue that we had with Mr. Momolu. So Jean-Pierre, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, good morning or good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please.
Yes, this is Jean-Pierre. I live in Kenya. I run a refugee-led community-based organization, and I followed the discussion from the beginning. But I want to ask a general question, especially based on the presentation that has been done by Mr. Meshak, talking about the discussions undergoing on the refugee having a alien card that allows them to have some privileges on maybe that will give them access to opening bank accounts. My question is, yes, this MOU, I would like to, maybe I'm curious to understand, will this MOU also talk about the right to movement, refugees coming in, getting out of the camps, moving around the country to trade and pursue business opportunities? Will they also give them the right to, let's say someone has stayed, some people have been refugees for so long in a country, for 20, 30 years, but you find that a refugee cannot have, does not have a document for all that long time, and cannot have a right to buying a land, buying a house. I follow the Mariam talking about the situation in Tanzania, but we know that Tanzania have already repatriated refugees who have been there for several years, and they had even got married to Tanzanian citizens, but then they were repatriated back to Burundi, back to Rwanda. Those are the issues, but I would like to know if probably in this case of MOU, where UNHCR and other refugee organizations are negotiating, do they consider those points such as movements, loan, grants, maybe from financial institutions or the banks? Do they also consider probably the youth who are really struggling to access the fund, and yet we know some governments have the youth entrepreneurship funds, even the social protection for refugees? That was my question for maybe for Meshak and any other, probably our colleague from Uganda who has presented on how it has been successful in Uganda. But also probably another question to Mariam and Mayada, are they also considering probably reaching out to other countries apart from now the scope where they are operating? And probably another, which is the final point, is probably a warning for me to financial institutions that are actually pouring money to the government, probably where government are saying, oh, we are supporting refugees. We have also put in place some policies that are there meant to actually to benefit refugees. But then do they do the monitoring and evaluation, see how the money actually given out actually are impacting positively the lives of refugees. Thank you very much. That's my question.
Thank you very much. Who would like to address that question? Kenneth, I think he's looking at you a little bit. Would you care to comment on his question?
Yeah, okay. The issue of documentation, because he was asking about the MOU, I think Joel certainly would have commented on that one. But basically what I can really say, and maybe to re-echo what Joel mentioned, in Uganda, really, we don't see any problem for sure when it comes to documentation. And if I can talk again the line that that is so specific to my area of regulation, for instance, we moved from the IDs and we even allowed attestation letters so long as the information on the attestation letter is in the database of UNHCR, then you are free to really integrate. And I was seeing even people in the comments actually sharing messages that refugees who are here, honestly, they have integrated so well with the locals and they are living normal life. And even when we are doing our programs, really, we don't specifically say this is for the refugees and then this one is for the locals. They live almost the same. We set up the standards for the telecommunication operators to have coverage, 95% coverage. And of course, in mind, we knew that some of these refugee camps are really deep in those underserved and unserved areas. And we made it a condition of the telecom operators to make sure that they reach there. Not necessarily that we are targeting only the refugees, but even the locals who are already there. Joel has indicated that banks in Uganda have started moving towards those areas where the refugees are. So that clearly tells you, it tells you that even the business community in Uganda is actually looking at these refugees as part of them, and actually they're boosting the business. The telecom companies are moving further to go into these camps to make sure that they can get as many customers, because they are looking at these refugees as part of the customers actually. So I don't see a big problem so far. And I think, to me, Joel properly nailed it. The refugees who are here are getting even more comfortable. And maybe the only worry would be if they will ever want to go back. I mean, certainly they can get comfortable and they want to stay. But the locals have integrated with the refugees and everything is moving on well. They have equal opportunities. They can go and do their business as just as a local person. So it's not a big challenge, really. That's the only comment I can say. But of course, when it comes to the MOUs with the government, and I think Joel maybe, if he's still online, could really comment how far when it comes to the protection of the human rights, especially.
Okay. Sorry, Kenneth, before we get to Joel, somebody does have their hand up, and that is Dr. Henry Clark Kisembo. And I want to make sure Dr. Clark has a chance to ask his question.
Thank you so much, Kim, and a pleasure to listen to all the presentations and the research that was conducted. I am in Uganda currently, in Kampala, and I work with Dali as a chief managing partner, and refugees is part of the wider or broader area that we work with in different settlements and hosting communities. And this is not more of a question, but probably a comment that probably the efforts of all those working within the refugee space could pick up a leaf from Uganda, and also based on the comparisons of this study, and then use them to advocate in policy documents in other countries, because Uganda is quite unique that from say early 50s, we've had refugees, hosting refugees, and they've integrated And it's a bit hard to even distinguish or draw a line between the refugee and the Ugandan or the host. So this is because it's been historical. The whole recent influx of refugees from the strife in Southern Sudan, or even those from other neighboring countries, is most recent that has brought up an influx. But even with that influx, we still see that the integration is more of this acceptance from the communities. Even in Chaka, where there was a bit of refugee and host community conflicts, and had to sensitize the communities, the housing communities, that you have to live in harmony with these refugees because they are providing market, but also providing labor, and they are part of the communities. So as far as financial inclusion is concerned, I would like to say that, and I know Kenneth and others in Uganda will agree with me that refugees in Uganda have relatives who are Ugandans many times. That at the border point, you'll find that there is a Rwandese on the other side and a relative who is Ugandan, a Sudanese on the other side and a relative who is Ugandan. So on all border points, the refugees have Ugandan relatives. So to access finance, they will go through one, either their relatives who already have documentation so they can be able to access finance, but also you realize that other than the tiers which are regulated by Bank of Uganda, for a long while, VSLAs, SACCOs, MFIs have really not been so strict in their KYC on where do you come from, as long as the community knows you and the local council chairman can sign for you a letter, you're able to access financial services. So I find that Uganda is really pretty unique, and it's a policy of government not to discriminate, but integrate openly with the refugees. They are urban refugees, very wealthy, and even employing Ugandans in their businesses. And so it's a win-win in this country that I think many countries could replicate. How does Uganda manage amidst the whole refugee population that is here to live in harmony, but also engage in business and also financial services? Like Ken has already said that, for example, Ugaford has gone in, Opportunity has gone in, Equity is going in. I could list a number of financial institutions because we are working with them that are going into this space. And even we've negotiated interest rates down from commercial rates down to be affordable within this refugee space. So it's more of giving a highlight or insight into the refugee situation in this country, Uganda, but also knowing that what happened in other countries where we are working as DALI. Thank you so much.
Kim, let me just jump in before because we're almost at the end, if you don't mind. Everyone has been talking about how, number one, unique Uganda is in terms of their response to refugees, and which, as we know, has a long history. And in fact, many Ugandans are themselves were themselves at one time displaced or refugees. So Jean-Pierre, you added a couple of interesting lines in the chat here after you talked. And I think it's really interesting to explore these in terms of the limits to integration. So Jean-Pierre writes, and let me ask you, Joël and Kenneth, about these limits. So can refugees set up business companies, he writes? Can they buy properties in their names? And finally, the one that I think is most important, because this is, as we always know, the ultimate goal of durable solutions, can refugees become citizens in Uganda? So could you say, Joel, are there limits to how positive Uganda is? I mean, we know Tanzania had an effort to introduce citizenship for a while ago that was stopped. But has Uganda ever thought about or considered allowing refugees to become citizens?
As far as I know, as I said, I don't think this is something that is in the making. But again, there is no need for that necessarily. I mean, as long as, you know, if you take one example of a settlement called Naki Valley, which I mentioned before, you know, this settlement is like 62, 63-year-old. And it has received successive waves of refugees, obviously, but also beyond sort of the history of indeed generous, you know, welcoming asylum policy for refugees. I mean, refugees are free also to move elsewhere outside the settlement, except that they won't receive assistance. As our colleague before said, many of the refugees, even if they don't have relatives necessarily in Uganda, are from, of course, ethnic group, clan, sub-clan, and so on. So there is this to and fro movement, even in normal times, except that now they tend to stay longer and so on. But you see, these borders, the president said it also. I mean, it could sound like, you know, sort of typical political statement. He said, you know, but all these borders, of course, are you know, as we know, the result of colonialism and so on, and they're not of our concern, or except that they exist. But you know, and I think the president believes that fairly strongly. Secondly, he also believes strongly that the refugees can be an accelerator for development, what I've been calling the refugee dividend. So again, this background. There is the issue about, you know, people settling in, getting Ugandan nationality. Some of them probably are doing it because of marriage, probably, you know.
Yeah, and may I ask, what about the children? The children born of refugees? Are they entitled to Ugandan citizenship? Are they stateless or what?
No, they keep the nationality of the country of origin, as far as I know.
But they would not have a birth certificate or anything like that, no?
Sorry?
Children of refugees.
Sorry, Karen.
Sorry, children of refugees, and not just South Sudan, but Congolese. Would they have a birth certificate for Uganda or for where?
No, they get a birth certificate.
Of Uganda?
Issued by NIRA. No, they frankly, they get the birth certificate issued by the, I think, national NIRA, National Identification and Registration Agency, if I'm not wrong. But they are, as soon as they are above, I don't remember what, 2 years, I think, they get their own. They get registered on the ID card of the refugee family. So they keep, as far as I know, they do keep the nationality of their country of origin, unless if they were to make a specific request. But I don't know if many people who have done that, frankly. So I could check that out. But frankly, I've not heard of that as a big issue. Let's put it that way.
We're going to have to draw the session to a close, but I want to thank the panelists. I think you've really mined some of these issues. Let's not forget, we're going to have some more tomorrow. We're going to go a little bit deeper into a number of these areas. So thank you very much, panelists. I'm now going to turn it over to Annaline.
Thank you, Kim and Karen, for moderating this great discussion. It's really great to see the engagement also in the chat. And I think some of the questions have also been answered by panelists in the chat. So thank you so much for that. And as Kim says, tomorrow we'll have a further chance for Q&A as well. So please do come back and with any of the questions that you would still like to discuss tomorrow. So we're coming almost to an end of this first day. And we just wanted to very quickly give you some insight into the 4 key sessions that we will have tomorrow. So we will have 4 breakout sessions. And I'm going to ask each of the organizers of the sessions tomorrow to just give a very quick, very short pitch for that session. And then afterwards, we'll have our closure from from my IRC colleague, Alyosha. So just we'll give the floor first to Maria for introducing the first breakout.
Yes, hello and welcome. Thank you all. So the first breakout session will be on responses by faith-based or refugee self-help organizations, obviously being critical and crucial as we have heard today, but are they scalable? And that is what we will be exploring. What are the challenges in scaling these solutions that these organizations are proposing?
Thanks, Maria. Next up, Brian from IRC. Hi, Brian.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Brian. I work with the IRC. My job is very simple, just to interest you in tomorrow's session, which I'll be moderating. We shall be continuing the discussion. You know, we've heard from the evidence-based and findings, and I've liked the traffic in the chat. I've been following it very closely. We shall be continuing the same discussion, you know, teasing ourselves on what else works to support the livelihood and specifically the financial health for refugees and other displaced populations. So we shall hear from some experts around what's available in other contexts globally, but also some attempts by some players to, you know, to generate more evidence around this topic. So needless to say, I'm so excited and looking forward to see you all in that session. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Really great. Swati, do you want to go next?
Yeah. And next we have the breakout where we will debate on whether digital financial services, the current buzzword, are actually supporting refugee livelihoods. We begin with the use case of digital humanitarian transfers. So that's because that's the focus in many refugee situations. But then we question if the hope of that leading to broader financial inclusion is realistic, or is it a hype? And we begin with some reflections from Jordan, and we have then an expert panel from UNHCR, IRC, GIZ, and Safaricom, and a very dynamic moderator to share their experience. So we invite you to join and enrich the discussion tomorrow. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Swati. And then last but not least, Julie, do you want to introduce the fourth session?
Yes, we have an excellent star-studded cast joining us tomorrow in breakout session number 4, which we're calling Nothing New Under the Sun. Our panelists will be trying to prove to me that there's actually new and meaningful innovation happening in the policy and technology realms that could make transformational change for refugee populations. We have Nat Robinson of the Leaf Global FinTech, Karim Bin Humam of Skill Lab coming on stage to make the case for tech innovations. And on the policy side, we have 2 contenders arguing that there's a reason to be optimistic about policy transformation, especially around some of these foundational rights we've been talking about. We have the inimitable Helen Dempster of the Center for Global Development and Nahla Rifai of IRC Jordan. It's going to be an epic conversation, so please join us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really looking forward to those discussions tomorrow. Maria, can I quickly ask you, was there anything practical that you needed to tell the participants for today to be able to join the breakouts tomorrow?
Yes, so we actually would like to ask all of you to take a quick poll. It's just one question. I'm going to launch it now, just to get a sense of what session you will all be interested in, and we'll see if we can start getting you set up. And also for tomorrow, if you could all look into updating your Zoom client, if you do have Zoom on your desktop, this will really help you be able to self-assign into the session that you want to join, and will make the transition very smooth so that you can really take advantage of all the topics we will be discussing tomorrow.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes, perfect. Once I get all the responses in, I'll go ahead and close the poll.
Okay, but in the meantime, we can move forward, Maria?
Yes, please, go right ahead.
Okay, great. So then, last but not least, I want to introduce to you our IRC colleague, Alyosha Donofrio, who is our Vice President and Head of Technical Excellence, to give some closing remarks for today. Please, Alyosha, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Annalene, and thanks, everyone. So it sounds like you've been having some extremely interesting discussions. I only caught the tail end of one, and I'm intrigued by the debates that you'll be having tomorrow. one of the unfortunate aspects of an aid bureaucrat's life is you never quite control your own time. And so I was unable to join as many of the sessions today as I would have liked to. But what I would like to say is that, you know, the work that you're doing in these discussions is extremely important for carrying forward crucial work around the economic and financial inclusion of refugees at both a policy and a practice level. The pieces of the debate I just heard seem to be hitting on all of the right issues, and the sessions as described tomorrow will take that a stage further. So look, for service providers like the IRC, and for someone like me in a role overseeing the quality of our work globally, it's music to my ears to read research that is drilling down into the experience of refugees, the experience of people at the receiving end of assistance, or not at the receiving end of assistance, our clients, our beneficiaries, or those we seek to serve. And for us to be really drawn to this issue of financial health as a journey, as a process, and to accompany them, to accompany our clients along that journey. So we're delighted to be part of this research partnership. We want to thank our partners, Tufts and the Catholic University, and apologies for botching this, Eichstätt, Ingolstadt, for co-organizing this event. Supporting the financial health of refugee clients and their access to relevant services is critical to refugee self-reliance, and therefore to all of our work, so our work at IRC and to yours across your organizations. In our case, it ranges from delivering much needed humanitarian cash through supporting refugee-run village savings and loan associations, to providing business grants for refugee entrepreneurs to establish businesses, to access capital, to move forward in that financial health journey. As we heard as we've seen in the findings, as has been discussed today, it's important to combine financial services with broader livelihood support, taking a client-centric approach to meeting refugee needs. At the IRC, we tend to try and implement a kind of holistic, capital-centric approach and provide a bundle of services catered to refugee clients' needs and skills. For example, combining cash grants and business skills training with smoothing access to traditional financial markets, or establishing informal financial service mechanisms where necessary. We focus on supporting clients to build transferable skills and financial literacy, so they're supported in a long-term search for work, are enabled or are helped to find employment across sectors, and so that they can also learn how to manage risks and remain resilient to future shocks as they encounter them. And throughout that, we really have taken an institutional position to adopt a feminist lens and to really focus on transforming gender norms to actively promote women's use and control of resources. Findings from this research have been, and from this partnership, from this engagement, have been already influencing our programming and our work. Thanks to the support of the Open Society Foundations, IRC team in Uganda has been working to design pilot programs that build from findings, supporting livelihoods and financial service access for urban and rural refugees in Uganda. And I hope you, not to plug this too much, but I hope you can learn more about this in tomorrow's livelihoods breakout session. We've also used evidence from the FIND research in discussions with key policymakers. It's been a useful route into important advocacy conversations, for example, highlighting the difficult financial situation of Syrian as well as non-Syrian refugees ahead of the Supporting Syria and the Region Brussels conferences the EU hosted in June last year and March of this year. It has fed into a number of reports, A Decade in Search of Work, and our analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on refugee economic opportunities, financial services, and digital inclusion. So we're extremely pleased to be able to push forward this conversation on refugee financial health through our continued partnership with the German government to promote the roadmap to sustainable and responsible financial inclusion of forcibly displaced populations. This is a multi-stakeholder partnership bringing a range of actors together, including donor governments, international organizations and alliances, and it offers a key set of policy recommendations for each relevant stakeholder group. So we look forward to playing our part in implementing these recommendations to further financial health for refugees. So very grateful to both BMZ and Open Society Foundations for the support for this research and for getting this pilot programming up and running. This is crucial for improving refugees' financial health so they can move out of a survivalihoods phase. And I have to say that as a lover of the English language and a skeptic of new phrases, but I think survivalihoods really stuck as a useful frame of reference. So helping refugees move out of the survivalihoods phase and into a more stable financial situation where they can recover, start saving and planning. So jointly with all of you, I'm looking forward to more discussions on day 2, which I sincerely hope I'll be able to join. And I wish you all a very good afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alyosha. That's a really great note to end with. And hereby I close this day. So I'm really hoping to see you all again tomorrow. And thank you so much for being here and engaging in the discussions. Thanks, everybody.